Knowing how to confidently set boundaries can really be a game changer for so many things in your life. Now, you may have heard a lot of people talking about boundaries and setting boundaries, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into them to help you understand different types of boundaries, what they are, how to overcome struggling with setting boundaries, and what the benefits are of setting these boundaries in your life. So, let's get into it. So, your personal boundaries are how you set expectations in relationship to others. This can be work relationships, family, your significant other, it can be friends, or any type of relationship that you have with other people where maybe you're working together or spending any amount of time together. Your personal boundaries are what you set that is acceptable for you based on how you feel, what your values are, what your priorities are, and knowing yourself to the point and to the level of, knowing when something feels good or feels bad. So there's a few different types of boundaries, so I want to just quickly explain those. The first is a physical boundary, which, has to do with your own personal space and your body and setting boundaries around that. There are emotional boundaries, which can mean a few different things. You can have emotional boundaries around not taking on other people's emotions. So being able to separate yourself from the emotions of others so that it doesn't affect your life in a negative way, and not taking responsibility for others' emotions that they're dealing with. Emotional boundaries can also have to do with, the way you're spoken to, or the way that you are treated, the way that you feel, and what is acceptable to you. Because, life isn't always going to be perfect and happy and positive. So, what are your emotional boundaries with other people in terms of how they make you feel, how safe you feel with them, or when you're in conflict with someone, what is acceptable and not acceptable to you? There's also time boundaries, and that's really being able to allocate your time appropriately and effectively. This is a huge one for work because a lot of times, people are asked to take on more work and they become stressed. And often the stress at work has to do with a major sense of urgency. So, prioritizing your time and knowing what your boundaries are as far as what you can take on, what you actually have time for, and being able to set those boundaries with someone who is a boss to you or higher up position in your job. Time boundaries can also be set with, friends or significant others or family in terms of how much time you have available to those people. So there's a few different ways that you can set time boundaries. Next, we have mental boundaries, and that's really just about yourself. That's setting boundaries within yourself and being comfortable and sure in what your own thoughts and beliefs are. So it's keeping that within yourself and understanding and defining for yourself like what those boundaries are, those mental boundaries. And then there's material boundaries, which has to do with your own personal belongings. If you're willing to let people borrow things of yours, or the way, if someone does borrow something of yours, the way that they treat it, or any way that we're talking about like an actual material possession and how you've decided you want to set boundaries around that item. So why do you want to set boundaries? Why are so many people talking about setting boundaries these days? And what is the reason behind it? The first is really to respect yourself and know what feels good and true to you. A lot of times, we can give in to other people or start to people please, and it doesn't feel good. Because of this, we become very stressed out or very overwhelmed. So setting boundaries really helps you when you're overwhelmed or stressed, and it can help you with your time to make sure that you are setting aside enough time for yourself, for your well-being, for your family, for everything in life. Life is busy, life is chaotic sometimes. So setting boundaries and standing firm in like what you need for yourself, what you need in terms of your time or things you need to do for yourself, setting those boundaries and making sure you are vocal about it to the people that need to know about them so that they can either help you with those boundaries or make sure that they're respecting those boundaries for you. If you are finding yourself saying yes to things and you deeply want to say no, this is another reason to set boundaries. Because if you are a yes person and you want to help others and you want to put others first, that can be great. However, not if it comes at your own expense in terms of your well-being or in terms of, getting things done that you want to get done, in terms of how you're spending your time in your life. So if you are saying yes to things and you don't want to and you want to say no, that is something to practice, and setting boundaries around what you're going to say yes to, what you're going to say no to is an important step. A lot of times, the things that I see the most in terms of what people struggle with when they're trying to set boundaries is really that people pleasing mentality where you are scared of conflict or you're worried about how someone else will perceive you or what they're going to think of you if based on whatever boundary you've set. There's also that feeling of guilt that comes up, and you can feel guilt and you can feel these things and still know that the best decision for yourself is setting that boundary. So sometimes you're going to feel those negative feelings and it might be a little bit of a struggle, but that's why when you practice setting these boundaries and practice setting them in a smaller setting, like a quick example would be maybe you're asked to go to some family party and you've already given a lot of time to seeing the family and you had planned on spending this day for yourself. Maybe you have something you're doing with your family, or you had a personal project you wanted to work on, or you're working on your business, or you just wanted downtime to relax. And you know that, your family would not accept you saying, no, I don't want to go to this event. And if you said no, you would be setting a boundary and you would be doing what's best for you. And then maybe you feel like a really big sense of guilt from that. If that feels too far for you, if that feels like too big of a boundary too fast, you can still practice setting boundaries. You can say, okay, I'm going to come, but I'm only going to come for 2 hours. By communicating the expectation, you are letting everyone know what you plan on doing in advance. So that can help alleviate any potential conflict in the future. And you're compromising. You really want to do this other thing, but these other people have expectations of you and want you to join. So you're meeting in the middle. And that is still setting a boundary because you're able to really, again, find that balance, find that medium happy point so that everyone gets a little bit of something, everyone gets a little bit of your time, and you still feel good about what you're doing versus feeling completely depleted and like you've people pleased and just completely given into something that you didn't want to do. When you are setting boundaries, it's really important to remind yourself that you are prioritizing yourself. You're prioritizing your well-being. You are prioritizing your health, your family, whatever it is that is kind of the reason behind your boundary, which number one, you never have to explain your reason why you're setting boundaries. You are your own individual person and you are allowed to do what you want to do. And it's not selfish. Prioritizing yourself and your needs and your desires and your wants is not selfish. So it is important that you remember that, especially if you are struggling to stick to a boundary or struggling to set a boundary. You're not being selfish. You are prioritizing self-care. Remind yourself of your why. When you really know your priorities, your values, your goals, and your desires, those are the reasons behind, the boundaries that you have. So when you stand firm in your boundaries and you know why you have that boundary, it will be easier to stick with the boundary, to set the boundary. And it's going to feel good when you do it and you really make that decision for yourself. So, how can you set these boundaries? We've talked about some of them, but let's get really clear on how to set your boundaries and how to keep them. Be very clear in what your boundaries are and why you have these boundaries set. That's kind of what I just spoke about when I was talking about struggling with boundaries and knowing your why. But when you are really clear and you have that intention, then you feel good and know why you're setting the boundary. So it can help you to keep the boundary because you know yourself, you know your why, you know your reasoning behind it. And that is something of importance and value to you. Use I statements to express yourself. If you are ever setting a boundary with someone, don't be quick to point the finger or tell someone like what they're doing or what if you don't like what they're doing or whatever it is. Make sure you are using I statements to just talk about yourself, what you want, what you feel, and that you're doing this or setting this boundary for yourself. Be assertive, but not aggressive. Sometimes people can have a hard time between the two and maybe become passive aggressive or become overwhelmed and it, might stir up some more emotion and feelings, but be assertive. Like stand firm in your decision, stand firm in your boundary, and be assertive about that boundary, but make sure you're doing it in a way that is still respectful of other people. And just a reminder, and something that I always tell people when talking about setting boundaries, is that people who don't respect your boundaries, it's for their own personal benefit. It's for their own personal gain. Anybody who you have a respectful relationship with, where there's respect on both sides, understanding on both sides, and nobody's trying to, control the other person, will understand what your boundaries are, and they would not want to cross those boundaries because they understand that that's for you. If they're trying to cross that boundary or trying to make you feel guilty for that boundary, it's for their own benefit because they want something from you. They want you to do something, whatever it is. But keep that in mind and really consider and think to yourself, what's going on in this dynamic or this relationship? How can there be more respect from this person? How can I express my needs in a respectful way so that I can feel that respect from them and still stick in my boundary? If someone is still trying to push through your boundaries and they don't respect you, that might be something to take a step back and look at that relationship and, see if it can be improved upon, see if there's something that can be done. There are so many benefits to setting boundaries. So I really invite you to get clear on what your boundaries are. It will create less stress in your life. It will create more trust within yourself. It will create better relationships because when everybody is clear in the relationship on, their own needs, their own desires, their own boundaries, it can really create something very beautiful where everyone knows where everyone stands within that relationship. And there's a lot of respect there. When you have your own needs met, that will just radiate into so many other areas in your life. And it starts with setting boundaries. And the last thing I'll say is I know that most of this video I've talked about setting boundaries with other people. Sometimes you have to set boundaries with yourself as well. That might be setting a boundary around, what you're planning to do. Maybe it's around scrolling on social media. Maybe it's around the money you're spending or how you're spending your time or whatever it may be. Consider if you are struggling within yourself, maybe you need to set boundaries within yourself too. And you can go through these same tips and really figure out your reason why and be firm with yourself and be disciplined because the results are going to be awesome.